Hi guys, and welcome back. And we are going to look at proportional relationships and equations again this week. And so we are moving forward from just finding out what the constant of proportionality is. And this week we're actually going to look at writing the equation. So first things first, proportional relationships and equations. Let's write equations describing proportional relationships. First learning target that we're going to have today is going to be, I can write an equation in the form of y equals k times x to represent a proportional relationship described by a table or a story. Remember, k is our constant of proportionality. The y and the x come from our x and y tables. Our second learning target today is going to be I can write the constant of proportionality as an entry in a table. So you're going to continue solving problems in the table as well. And so our first problem we're going to look at is going to kind of be a little bit of what we did last week. And so our problem says a recipe says that 2 cups of dry rice will serve 6 people. Complete the table as you answer the questions. Be prepared to explain your reasoning. And so I encourage you to take notes for today so that you have good information that you can utilize as we continue this process we're doing. So let's look at our first one. It says, how many people will 1 cup of rice serve? And so when I'm looking at my table, I notice that the x value, our cups of dry rice, is already filled out, and we are going to finish the table for our y value. And so I want to see what my constant of proportionality is so I can get started. So I want to find my k value. And remember we said that k equals y over x. All right, we learned that last week. So if I go to my spot on my table where I have something already completed, this 2 cups of rice and 6 people. And so if I plug it in to my equation, let's find out what k equals. And so my x value is 2 and my y value is 6. And so I'm going to write a ratio of 6 over 2. And if I simplify that, I'm going to find out that my k value is actually a 3. And so if I want to check my work, I will notice that 2 times 3 equals 6. And so I notice that I can find the y value throughout my entire table if I use that constant of proportionality. So let's go back and look. So if that's the case, 1 times 3 is 3. And so 1 cup of rice will serve 3 people. 2 cups of rice was already done for us. So let's move on to our table and our second set of questions. How many people will 3 cups of rice serve, 12 cups, or even 43 cups? And so 3 cups of rice, 3 times 3 is 9. 12 cups of rice, 12 times 3 is 36. And this last one, 43 cups of rice. Have you actually ever cooked 43 cups of rice? I haven't, and I eat a lot of rice. So 43 times 3 is 129 people. And so I can continue filling this out. Let's look at this last one. This last one is our x value. And so I have an unknown number of cups of rice. And so I can actually figure out my equation doing this. If I go back up and I look at this original equation up here of our k equals y over x. Right now there's nothing over x, but we did say that for every x value, we can multiply by 3. So if that's the case, what is 3 times x? Well, 3 times x is 3x. The x value is unknown. So that means I could go back and I can look at any number of cups of rice and I can always input that value, multiply it by 3, and I'm going to always be able to determine how many number of people that I can fit in my recipe. So let's look at doing the equation for this one. And so I've got k equals y over x. That's my constant of proportionality up here. And so when I want to write my equation, and so typically when we want to write the equation, I am looking for finding out what my y value equals. And so I'm going to set it up with y equals, And really, all I'm going to do is flip around the rest of my variables. And so I know that I can find my y value if I take x and I multiply it by my constant of proportionality. And we just said that k equals 3 all the way throughout our table. And so in this case, I would have y equals my constant of proportionality, my k, times x, okay, or y equals kx. And that could be my formula at all times. Okay. In this particular case, for this particular formula, my equation is going to be y equals 3 times x for everything in this table that we are using. Okay? That's an important thing to take away from this particular problem. Let's move on to problem number 2. Feeding a crowd. You guys have actually seen this problem last week a little bit. And so feeding a crowd, recipe says that 6 spring rolls will serve 3 people. Complete the table as you answer the questions. Be prepared to explain your reasoning. How many people will 1 spring roll serve? How many people will 10 spring rolls serve? 16 spring rolls? 25 spring rolls? How many people will X or N spring roll serve? So even an unknown part, as we had in the previous problem. So let's look at this one again. So we notice that in this particular problem, I have the number of spring rolls, my X value, is already complete. And so let's look at switching colors here. All right, and so I have one part of my table is already filled out. And so if I'm looking at that and I want to look at what my k value is, so k equals y over x. In this case, our y is 3, and my x happens to be a 6. Well, this is interesting. This particular fraction happens to be less than 1. So I'm actually not going to necessarily divide, but I'm going to go ahead and just simplify my fraction. And so I look at 3 and 6, and I know that my biggest factor that will go into both is a 3. And so I'm going to divide both sides by 3 to go ahead and simplify that fraction. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. And so I notice that my k, or my constant of proportionality value, is actually a fraction this time, and it is less than 1. When I'm looking at this first one that was done, the 6 spring rolls and 3 people, I probably could look at that and be like, how did I go from 6 to 3? Well, most of you guys would be like, well, you divided by 2. I did divide by 2, but I also could have multiplied by its reciprocal, which just happens to be the 1/2. And so 6 times 1/2, go ahead and multiply 6 times 1 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. I get 6 over 2, and I've reduced it to 3. So let's go ahead and multiply each of these other x values by 1/2 to get our numbers. 1 times 1/2, well, it's just 1/2. 1 times any number is itself. Stick down at 10 spring rolls. 10 times 1/2. Again, 10 times 1 is 10. 1 times 2 is 2. 10 over 2 is 5. 16 times 1/2. 16 times 1 is 16. 1 times 2 is 2. 16 over 2 is 8. Next one, 25 times 1/2. 25 times 1 is 25. 1 times 2 is 2. 25 divided by 2 is actually not a whole number. It's going to be a decimal, or I could do a fraction. But we're going to go ahead and write it as a decimal and put 12.5. So down at our n, our unknown value. You're correct. We're going to also multiply that by 1/2. And so 1/2 times n is just 1/2 n. So when I'm looking at this one, notice I didn't have to do too much extra in this one. I just multiplied my k value. Let's look at what would our difference be between this particular table and the table before it. So completing this table that we did with the cooking of the rice and looking at the spring rolls, we want to know what were some of the things that were the same and what were some of the things that were different. And so Here's the completed tables for both of them. And on this one, we said our formula was y equals 3 times x, because we said our proportionality was 3 all the way through. On the spring rolls, we use the constant of proportionality of 1/2. And so on this one, our formula would be 1/2 times x. And I would be able to use that equation all the way through for each of them, regardless of the number of cups of dry rice or the number of spring rolls that I'm going to use. So it does not always have to be a whole number for my constant of proportionality. In fact, as you get into algebra, you're going to realize that there's a lot of fractions. So here is your task. Your task is to, when you're done with this video, and hopefully you took good notes, you are going to go back to your assignment and you are going to look for the Google Forms link, and you are actually going to complete this assignment. This is the only problem that you're going to do for today. So it says a bakery uses 8 tablespoons of honey for every 10 cups of flour to make bread dough. Some days they make bigger batches and some days they make smaller batches, but they always use the same ratio of honey to flour. Number 1, complete the table. Number 2, if F is the cups of flour needed for H tablespoons of honey, write an equation that relates F and H. That's just like looking at X and Y. And so in this case, my F happens to be right here, and my H happens to be right here. I'm still going to have a constant of proportionality, okay? And so instead of having X and Y, they're going to use the variables H and F. Same concept, okay? And number 3 is how much flour is needed for 15 tablespoons of honey, 17 tablespoons. Explain or show your reasoning. Again, you are going to go back to your assignment in Google Classroom, and you are going to click on the Google form and complete your assignment. If you have any questions, remember to reach out for me. Again, I hope you guys are doing well, and we do miss you being in the classroom and being at school every day. So please reach out to us if you are needing anything in particular, even if it's not academic related. Please take care of yourselves and take care of your families as we continue going through this. You guys have a great weekend. Bye.